My topic this morning is the acceptance house. I already mentioned the concept that we are going to start from scratch. But before I do, I would like to go back a little bit to reflect to three criticisms of the Real Bill's doctrine. One criticism says that a real bill is fraudulent because it promises something which it cannot do and doesn't do. And I believe that what we have covered so far would give an adequate answer to this criticism. The real bill promises payment in gold. And the criticism is that this promise is fraudulent. My answer to the criticism is that there is a confusion here between two concepts. One is a banknote on the one hand and a gold certificate on the other. In the United States before 1933, when Roosevelt confiscated gold coins and other forms of gold of the citizenry, there were two types of paper money. Well, more than two, but let's concentrate on these two in circulation. One was a banknote proper, which more specifically was called a Federal Reserve note, and it did have a legend which referred to gold. And the other type of paper money, which was also in circulation, was gold certificates that was issued by the Treasury. It had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. It also promised payment in gold to bearer on demand. Now, the distinction between the two is very important. A gold certificate had a legend on it which read, "This is to certify that so much gold had been deposited in the Treasury of the United States and is payable to bearer on demand, period." So this was earmarked gold payable to bearer. The banknote and by implication a real bill, because the assets behind a banknote are not gold. It's nowhere stated that the gold had been deposited and is held at the Federal Reserve Bank payable. This is not what it stated. Everybody knew what a real bill was, and that the asset backing the banknote, in this case the Federal Reserve note, is a real bill, which is a maturing good on its way to the consumer, maturing into gold, because it's understood that at the end of its journey, when the maturing good reached the market, it will be sold for the gold coin of the consumer, which then would liquidate all the liabilities which arose on the way during the process of production. So there are two different concepts, two different promises involved. And the confusion I referred to, which the critiques of the Real Bill's doctrine are guilty of, is that they by implication suggests that a real bill is just another gold certificate. And that's not the case. It does not say that gold has been earmarked, deposited, and held at the bank, treasury, wherever, is available for immediate delivery. It just said that, subject to business conditions, the bank will pay gold to bearer. So there's a difference. There's a difference. The banknote per se is not a fraudulent instrument. If it follows the description as we have gone through it, that there is the production, the consumer demand, it has to be fast enough, has to be 91 days, blah, 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 and at the end of the process, the consumer surrenders the gold coin which then. So in other words, there is no fraud involved per se. That's the way I look at it. I'm trying to persuade you now. If you are not persuaded, that's partly my fault, but I am urging you to think about this. I understand psychologically we are all prejudiced about banknotes because there's so much fraud really has been committed deliberately, and as a result a lot of people suffered great economic pain in Europe, certainly in practically all the countries in Europe, and in North America, if not so far, it may not be so far obvious, but we are running into that situation that a lot of people will suffer because of fraud involving banknotes and various promises and so on. My point is that it doesn't have to be that way. There is a way to run a paper money system, let's say real bill based monetary system, and if it's done properly, no fraud and no economic suffering at the end. This is my position, and I'm not trying to conceal it from you that I've been attacked quite viciously by other hard money advocates who say that I completely misjudge the situation because it is defective from the beginning, it's conceived as a fraud and perpetrated as a fraud, etc., etc. So I thought that in the interest of truth and science, this issue has to be clarified, and that's why I am putting it to you. In fact, I'm asking you to help me to, if you have any lingering doubt, then this is the time and place to bring it out, and perhaps we can pursue it longer. So there, I expect comments and criticism from you during this particular period if you don't quite agree with that. So that was one area where the real bills doctrine was criticized. Well, of course, we haven't finished yet our course, and the missing part is how banks were born. And you see, at that stage, really, we haven't gotten very much farther the point that real bills can circulate on their own wings and under their own power, according to Adam Smith, and that has been tested. In particular, it was tested in England, in the Manchester area, where there's big manufacturing activity, especially cloth and made of wool, various stages, weaver, spinner, etc., all that. And it was very important because it was the stuff, what's the wool? It's not called yarn. Cloth. No, when it's made of wool, you don't call it cloth. Do you call it cloth? If it's made of cotton, you call it cloth, I know. But what about
gabardine?
I think you knit as opposed to cloth, but cloth.
It is cloth.
So that was the mainstay of the industry in the Manchester area, Lancashire. Actually, they were started from the sheep farm. Sheep were grazing, and then the sheep farmer got the wool. The wool had to be washed, refined, blah blah blah, and then went to the spinner, weaver, and so on. And the product came out, and it was to a large extent exported. So this made England very prosperous, this particular industry. And it's a historical fact, and Mises himself acknowledges it, that the bills, the real bills drawn on the various phases of that production actually circulated without any banks. In fact, Mises mentions that bill circulation was phased out only after the Bank of England opened a branch in the city of Manchester. So he can even put a date on it when so the bank presented itself, and then of course it could elbow out everybody else from the business, and we know the consequences. But the fact is that real bills do circulate, and they have this dynamics and so on. It's all there. We don't have to bring in banks. But even when you bring in the bank at the end, because historically that's what happened in practically all the in all the known cases, I would say even at that point there is no need immediately to make a charge of fraud, at least in my opinion, because it is possible to run the banking system on such a commercial basis that there is an underlying asset in the form of the real bill, which the bank takes and advances the loan to the producer and keeps these short-term instruments in portfolio until they mature, and so on. And if the bank ever runs into problems, has to make quick, unexpected payments, no problem, because although the real bill is not a gold certificate, very far from it, but the nature of the bill market backing it up is such that the bank can turn around and sell it with virtually no loss. Or if there's a small loss, the bank can just absorb. This is a business expense. A bank is a business like any other, so it has to have capital, and capital is there to provide for adversity in the course, which could arise in the course of business. So, all right, the second criticism which arose is that the fractional reserve banking system is fraudulent it was conceived as a fraudulent business, and it just got worse and worse, and eventually it collapses. Now, I have to take exception because I object to the term fractional reserve, because it suggests that the reserves which the bank keeps to cover its liabilities is not complete. Part of it may be covered with gold, but another part is not. Now that's not the case, at least not in the situation which I have been trying to explain to you in this lecture series, because one part of the liabilities of the bank, sure, is gold covered, but only a part. And the other part is also covered, although not by gold, but by real bills which mature into gold coin. And these are all short-term bills, so in time the bank will have the gold. As always, there is a risk involved, but even if you have gold coin reserves for the banknotes, you have a risk, because there could be a fire which does damage, or there could be robbery, great bank robbery, whatever. So the point is that the reserves are there. They are not fractional. They are full reserves, but part of the reserves are real bills maturing into gold coins. So that's a distinction which has to be made. And if you went to court and made a charge that the bank note is fraudulent because it promises to pay gold just like a gold certificate does, and it does not have the gold, the title to the gold, so it issues more liabilities than it has assets to show for it, then a reasonable judge would dismiss the charge as one without substance, because there is an obvious difference between a gold certificate and the bank note. The bank note does not state that the gold has been deposited and is there and is available. It has to be looked at dynamically. There's a flow which matures into gold, and the bank is standing ready to pay out that gold when it flows in. And so the third objection is that there is not enough gold in existence. We are not talking about the bank having control of gold. We just say globally there is not enough gold to back all the liabilities represented by the circulating real bills, so the whole system is constructed as a fraud. And I think this charge is based on a misunderstanding. A credit system, whether it's bills or bonds, is not working on the assumption that there exists physically that much above ground gold in the world, matching every dollar of gold liability by the same amount of physical gold somewhere. This has never been suggested, and it's not even necessary. And if anybody wanted to create a system like that, it just won't fly, because that's not how a gold-based system works. In fact, there is no rigid limit of the amount of credit which can be built safely on a given amount of gold. There's no limit, because it depends on many things, on how fast goods move, how fast bank transfers can move, if there's an innovation or the electronic communication comes in, that's obviously going to make bank transfers also faster. And once it is faster, then a smaller amount of gold can back up the same amount of credit. Now, again, if you hear that for the first time, you may have lingering doubts that this is a pipe dream and it's not the way and so on. There has to be just as much gold. But you just have to think about this and study it a little more closely. If you want to have the whole world trade gold based on a one-to-one basis, it just won't work for many reasons. One is the rigidity, that the world trade is something elastic. It sometimes expands, sometimes contracts, in a natural way, following the cycle of the seasons of the year, or following any other cycle which there may be, or simply the fact that the consumers could decide to save more and spend less, or vice versa. And accordingly, the total volume of the world trade will expand or contract, and this is natural. There has to be provision for the flexibility to accommodate it, and therefore rigid gold reserve is not the answer. There has to be a more elastic part of purchasing power, which will take that change into account and will adjust to demand. So the criticism of the real bills doctrine on the basis that it promises gold, but a much greater amount of gold than there exists or there is available, it doesn't hold water. Because only the maturing part, I mean, we were talking about the social circulating capital, and we even compared it to a river which is flowing into the ocean being the consumption, where the goods disappear. And we compared it to the salinity of the water, which could get higher as the molecules of the river, water molecules, are approaching the ocean. So what we are really saying is that this gold convertibility applies to the end of that journey, when the salinity is already high enough. The proximity of the maturing good is close enough to the ocean. And there is no suggestion or need for the whole amount of semi-finished maturing goods should be matched one-to-one by gold. It just wouldn't work. Or if you try to make it work, it would put the production process into a straitjacket, which would not benefit the consumer. So this is a natural development, and I think the last word is that there is no fraud. It doesn't mean that there is no fraud ever or under any circumstances, but at this stage there is no fraud. In fact, now that I just filled that gap, we start our subject discussing the acceptance house. That's the first time when fraud, where deliberate fraud, does in fact occur. So yesterday I already mentioned that the acceptance house is one of two routes from which banking grew up, the other being the discount house. And we have investigated the discount house as much as we could, and we came to the conclusion that the discount house need not, and in most cases did not, involve fraud. It was a straightforward business which was built on the ingenuity of the cloth merchant, who realized that if he understood how real bills emerge in commerce and in trade, when the semi-finished goods become finished goods and then are being sold to the consumer through the retail outlets, in that process there is no need to assume fraud, because there will be people, tradesmen, businessmen, who see the possibilities how they can make that flow of credit on the one hand and flow of goods in the opposite direction, how they can make that work more efficiently. And that's all for the good, and everybody benefits. This is not the same with the acceptance house. And I'm not going to do hair splitting here and investigate whether it can also be done properly and without fraud, because I have, from my studies of the history and also the theory of the acceptance business, is that in most cases it was fraudulent, and I don't even see the need to improve it, because sooner or later it will become fraudulent. The forces, economic forces present are such that the acceptance business is not a well-conceived business. That's my impression, but again, it's open to argument, and if you have objection, I'll be very happy to listen to it and discuss it any further. But there are good guys and there are bad guys, and the good guys are involved in the discount house business, and the bad guys are involved in the acceptance business. This is a broad, sweeping statement which may be subject to correction as far as there are exceptions. As always, there are small exceptions here and there. But I think by and large, this might be an acceptable position that when we analyzed the banking system as it grew up and as it came to control our lives, which we of course object to, and we would like to free ourselves, see ourselves free once more, then if we approach it in this sense that the banking business has two roots in historically from which it was being nourished, there was a good root and there was a bad root. This discount house, the acceptance, just like in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, there were two trees: the tree of the good knowledge, is that the word the Bible uses, and the tree of the bad knowledge. In the Bible, the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam and Eve the Garden of Eden, and there were two the fruit of the tree of good trees.
Fruit, I think it was the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Good and evil.
Oh, good and evil. All right.
Tree of life.
One was just the tree of life, one was just the tree of knowledge.
I just find this analogy interesting. You might say the Bible is also an oversimplification. You might say what I am suggesting here, that the good guy is the discount house, bad guy the acceptance house. That is also an oversimplification. Could be, but perhaps we just have to have some simplification when we study, because if we try to study reality in its original complexity, that's not going to work. You just have to, at one stage or another, simplify things. Yes?
I'm not sure that I know what an acceptance house is.
Okay, I introduced the concept yesterday. I'm going to repeat it. Okay. This is just an introduction. Put the thing into a framework. Good guys, bad guys, right?
It's like Bush.
Now the end product was bad, we know, the banks. But why was it corrupted? Okay. Now, the acceptance house grew out of an idea which came to, as I describe it in this second greatest story ever told, the idea occurred to the baker. Well, actually, this is a little background, okay? So perhaps before I talk about the acceptance house, I just talk about this particular little trick which the baker, the idea which he had, and then he invited the miller to be his accomplice, and they
Is this the cloth merchant or the baker or the cloth merchant? Are we mixing metaphors?
Well, remember the original four protagonists were in the cloth business,
Okay.
but then I also introduced
The baker.
the bread business.
Okay.
Okay, so we are now talking about the bread. I'm not suggesting all bakers are crooks and all cloth merchants are angels.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that, but it just so happened that I had to dress up an abstract idea with some concrete figures and roles and protagonists and antagonists and what have you. So this is the baker now.
Well, they work with yeast. They make things rise bigger than they are. So
All right. You can color it and dress it up, but here we have to keep it a little bit simple, because if it's too complicated, it would lead us too far. So, this is now reading, as it turns out, chapter 10, but it doesn't matter because I have skipped and
What was the idea of the baker?
I'm doing that. I'm talking about that. Okay. So this is now reading from the second greatest story ever told. One day, the manager of the discount house noticed that the bid-ask spread appeared in the trading of one particular real bill, and this was the miller on baker bill. So in other words, when the miller delivered the flour, billed the baker, and the baker accepted it, and the miller took the bill and put it into circulation. And normally the real bills traded at no spread or very, very little spread. And at the acceptance house, the manager noticed that there is something going on here, something fishy, because this particular bill showed an unusually wide spread. So he was keeping a watchful eye on the trading of this particular bill, and when it widened further, then he just suspended trading. He said, well, we have to wait and see. The situation should clarify itself. We don't know what's happening. So for the time being, he did not buy or sell. He just froze the trading of this particular bill. So So at this point I might just go out of my way just very little bit and explain why the spread should be either zero or very, very small. Well, I would say it's never really zero, but it could be so small that people won't bother collecting, they won't bother to keep quoting two prices instead of one. So, simplifying matters, we might say the spread is zero, but in fact it's never zero. It's just so small that it's negligible and people do tend to neglect it. So why is that the case? Why should it be the case? And the answer is, if you think of it, is that the bill, the real bill, is an appreciating asset. It is worth more day after day because it is approaching maturity. So remember, the bill before maturity is subject to discount. That's why we talk about discount house and discounting bills and so on. So it starts from a value less than the actual face value. But the face value is the amount which is payable at maturity. So how can that be? It can be only if day after day after day the value of the bill in the bill market at the discount house is increasing. A little bit, but it is. There is a definite tendency for increase. And because of this appreciating asset feature of the bill, it is very often possible that you bought a bill, turned around and sold it at the same price, which is normally not possible. Neither is it possible for commodities, nor is it possible for most financial assets such as bonds, for instance. Bonds are not an appreciating asset, and if you bought a bond and change your mind and want to sell it right away, you have to absorb a certain amount of loss, because the ask-bid spread in the bond market, quotation prices at which the market maker buys and the market maker sells, is not zero, it's positive. So that's the reason. I just wanted to put that in, that we are not making a mythology out of real bills and say that this is something, unnatural. No, it's very natural, that's the reason. It's an appreciating asset. And it's appreciating for a very good reason, because I don't want to repeat the whole thing, but we have been through this, that how the discount originated. That there was this possibility that if somebody wanted to prepay his liability, he would do it. He had enough gold to prepay it, but he said, I'm not obliged to do that, so I will do it only for a consideration if somebody gives me the discount. And he tried. All right, so we don't have to go through this again. So there it was, this problem at the discount house. The manager wanted to investigate what was going on with this Miller on Baker bill, which developed a spread, an unexpected spread, which was not at all natural, which was unnatural, and indicated that trouble may be brewing somewhere. So, it turned out that there was indeed a conspiracy between the Miller and the Baker. The baker was the smart guy, and he said that, oh gee, I heard that there is a bad wheat crop in large regions and so on. He put two and two together and came to the conclusion that the wheat price is going to go up. Fine. let's profit by it. Now, this had nothing to do with his own business, which was baking, turning flour into bread. But he thought that why not? It's a good sideline, and he wanted to speculate in the wheat market. So he went to the miller and told him about this possibility, and they both agreed that they want to do it. So the miller had this extra storage capacity to put the grain in, and rather than grinding all of it into flour and producing the bread and so on, kept part of the wheat in his bins, arrested the flow of wheat to the market, which was his right to do. But what was not his right to do, or their right to do, is to pretend that the wheat was still flowing, and they were issued as a conspiracy. You see, the two parties had to be involved. The two parties, both the baker and the miller, they pretended that the wheat was flowing to the market, baked into bread, the flour baked, and they kept issuing bills, real bills, against that idled wheat. And this they didn't have the right to do, because the whole real bill circulation is based on the axiom that the merchandise is moving to the ultimate consumer. And not only is it moving, but it has to move with a minimum speed, so that in 91 days the merchandise sold and consumed. So if you pretend on your document that this thing is moving, when in fact you have arrested its movement, then you committed a fraud. That's one thing. But the other and more important thing was that now, what was I going to say here?
The big difference between the asked and the big difference between the asked and
The bid price.
Yeah, that was a consequence. Okay, but now I'm pointing out why is this fraudulent to arrest the movement of merchandise while pretending that it's moving. Okay, well, one is a lie. There's a lie involved. But there is another one which has to do with the fact that that you finance your speculation. These conspirators are speculating on the wheat price. There's nothing to do, there's nothing wrong with speculation per se. What we criticize is the way you finance your speculation. Now, when you issue bills pretending that the wheat is moving when it's in fact held in storage in the expectation of highest price, you are financing your holding of wheat, throwing all the risk to society.
They're capturing the social circulating capital for their own benefit.
Yeah.
I think that's the terminology you were using.
Yeah, but the
Social
finance,
circulating capital.
the risk. Now you see, fine, you speculate, you incur risk, and you're aware of that risk, and you're willing to shoulder it, that's fine. But if you try to put the risk on society, that is definitely wrong. And that's what's happening, and that's what we should see clearly. When this conspiracy to put in fictitious real bills into circulation, pretending that the wheat is moving when in fact it's held in storage in the hope of higher wheat price, then what is happening is that you finance your speculation illegitimately, because you are throwing the risk on the shoulders of society, and that's not proper, that's a fraud, and this is wrong. And it's very dangerous also, as the further unfolding of the story showed.
That's stunning. Professor, I have to say that really is stunning. To me, it's new thinking. It points out a problem where, and in such a way that we have never viewed it, or at least collectively viewed it that way, that the private profit, in this case, comes at the expense of the public good, and we've come to accept the fact that private profit, speculative profit, at the expense of the public good is, well, it's got to come from somewhere, you know, and so be it. That's the marketplace, but that's merely the marketplace as it is today. That in the fully functioning marketplace that you described before, when real bills were in circulation before the banking system, it didn't happen. And that's the greatest difference. And it fully functioned because it was, the market was to the collective good of the social body.
Yeah, and the speculation included
That.
because speculation has a role to play. Speculation helps to eliminate the wide swings in the market. Some smart speculators anticipate correctly a future shortage, so they are buying before the knowledge becomes widely dissipated, and they are paid for that. It's a service. And in the Bible there is the example of Joseph who read the dream of the Pharaoh about the seven fat cows and the 7 lean cows, and the lean cows devoured the, and he predicted the physical shortage of grain and suggested to the Pharaoh that he should buy up the cheap. That was speculation, and it served society because it saved a lot of suffering when the shortage really turned out, and so on. So speculation is an organic part of the economic activity. It's beneficial. Agricultural speculation, yes.
I'm trying to grab onto the principle here, and I think I am, but I think you're implying that the dishonesty ultimately is a disconnect between the use of a short-term instrument, the 91-day, the note, and applying that to a long-term. Is that a fair statement?
No, because it could be, all this could happen within 91 days or outside of 91.
That's implied, though, I thought that the dishonesty was the extension of that period, beyond 90.
I am calling attention to the way of finance. You are a speculator, it's a legitimate business, and you have the knowledge to do it, and you take the risks. Fine, nothing to criticize.
You're not saying anything about term. You're not implying anything about term.
No, because there are examples for both,
okay.
Short-term, longer term.
What's the dishonesty then if it doesn't apply to term? And what's the burden that's put on society through the act?
Okay, the way to finance. Now, if you speculate, which means you buy up supplies while they are plentiful, because you anticipate shortages when you can benefit from a higher price. This is fine, but you have to worry about financing your inventory, speculative inventory, because that's more than what society is prepared to carry in the normal course of consumption. You see something which nobody else sees.
Okay.
So you want to finance your inventory. And if you do it out of your own pocket, fine. You are above reproach. Absolutely. And if you can convince another guy who has the money that he should chip in and you split the profits, that's fine too. What is objectionable and what is fraudulent is if you use the built-in facilities in social relations, which the bill market certainly is, which the real bill certainly is. You use that for the wrong purpose, to derive private advantage from a publicly provided service. You see? That's what we are criticizing. It doesn't have anything to do with the term.
And it still all clears in 91 days. If I, the baker, still cleared in 91 days in the goals and system, see that? Then the bill's performance,
I think I see another way of putting it, maybe Frank, I would say the dishonesty is if I've now bought that real bill from the baker, thinking that I was getting a very low risk instrument because a good was moving up in the market. And were I to know that it was actually, I was financing someone's speculation and that something might go wrong in a speculation, I might get nothing on, that's the fraud, that you're using a low, you're masquerading as low risk.
Yeah, you explained it very well. You answered my question.
But I am questioning the utility of speculation, because if still there are many goods and you are buying it and put it into the warehouse, then the shortage will arrive quicker than normally, than without my buying up the goods. And if the shortage will come, then I am abusing of this, I don't know, knowledge that I knew there would be a shortage, but the goods are not more than with that. The goods are not more. If I wouldn't have bought it up, then the shortage would have come later, and the people just could buy it up at the price as it was, while it was still available.
Well, obviously we disagree on that, but this is not really our topic here. I don't mind commenting on this, and my comments are as follows. Here is a speculator who sees something which practically nobody else sees. It could be due because he made a special study, he's more of an expert. It could be that he's just divining this. It doesn't matter how, but he sees something. He sees shortages coming. Shortages are not there at the time when he buys. In fact, there is a surplus. That's why the price is low. Remember, he buys when the price is low.
But if he doesn't buy it up, then the shortage will come later.
No, if he doesn't buy it up, the price would even fall more. And remember, when the price falls abruptly, it hurts the producer. When the price rises abruptly, it hurts the consumer. So somebody is getting hurt when the price is volatile. And all the speculator does, if he does it properly, is to tamper. He cannot probably eliminate the price fluctuation. That's the nature of the markets. But certainly the abruptness of price changes, he does. And that's very obvious. He buys before the shortage, So it's not obvious. There's abundance, and that's all other people see. Too much. They not interested. They know that there's plenty. But he knows that this is coming to an end. The speculator does. He sees that. So when he buys, his buying has the result that the price does not fall more, or it does not fall so precipitously. And that's the point. That's the whole point.
Could I just address this, please? I have something to say. It's not just this is only the core, the ripple spread. If the prices go lower and lower and lower, farmers go bankrupt, farmers plant less because they're not being paid for their product. The consumers use up the stuff and throw it away, they waste it. In Russia, they used to use bread as toys for the kids because it was subsidized, the price was so cheap. So there's a big distortion in the market. Then when the shortage comes, those farmers who are out of business cannot supply. So there's a bigger shortage, the price goes up, and who suffers the most? The poor people who don't have the money. So the speculator, by maintaining the price, helps to maintain the supply and protects the poorest people by having the supply available when the prices are going higher.
Yeah, this is exactly right. As Rudy points out, it's only half of the loaf when you see what happens when he buys. But the other half is when the shortage does, in fact, materialize and the price jumps, and there would be no way to satisfy that demand if the speculator did not have the extra storage. Now, of course, he will charge more than he paid for it because that was the whole thing. But people will be happy to pay because already everybody sees the shortage, and therefore they know that they just need, it could be foodstuff, as you say, but it could be something else. So, as I say, this is not my topic here.
I got it.
But if you think about this, you will agree that a lot of envy goes into the criticism of speculators, and I don't think that is right. You have to address the problem, what he does wrong, and that is the answer. It's not speculation per se what is wrong, but the way to finance your inventories, speculative inventories. By the way, the speculator can also lose, right? Because the shortage he anticipated may not materialize for various reasons. And if that's the case, then the speculator is going to lose. But he's well prepared to do that if he financed his speculation in the right way. And throwing the risk on society is definitely not the right way, because then society suffers for the foolish idea or just a misstep of the speculator. I mean, we all make missteps, the speculator does too. He doesn't have to be foolish. He knows that 9 out of 10 speculations he has will succeed, and he is fully prepared to meet the loss on the one where he loses money, where he was wrong. So that's part of his business. But the point is that in the case there is a loss, he has no right to shove the loss to society. This is not right. The whole bill market, the real bill circulation, is designed to finance a very essential public service to supply the consumer with the most urgently demanded goods, foodstuff and others. And for that purpose, society developed a system, the real bill system, which is a wonderful way of reducing the amount of capital. If you are a tradesman, whether it's the spinner or the weaver, you have to have capital, and a large part of that capital is circulating capital. which could be very expensive to finance. Now, the bill market makes this financing much easier because you can finance your circulating capital through the low discount rate. And if the underlying good moves too slowly, you can blame the consumer for it, but then you have no choice, but you have to carry a higher capital because you have to pay the higher interest rate to finance your inventory. But that's the way it is. As society does have this overwhelming need to finance essential goods, foodstuff, whatever else, which the consumption pattern of which is very regular, predictable, and there is no need to finance it through expensive ways such as interest rates, long-term, whatever. So society developed this spontaneously. Nobody forced people to accept bills. Everything is spontaneous in this business. So the idea is to reduce the amount of capital which the providers of these essential goods have to have. And this succeeds. This effort succeeded because the discount rate is normally very, very low in comparison interest rate. And however, society has to be on its guards not to allow abuses of this privilege. It's a privilege if you happen to be in the production line of something which the consumer demands urgently, and the consumer depends on it in an essential way. But there are possibilities to abuse it, and one typical way to abuse this social institution, the bill market, bill trading, is speculation. The speculator may think that I am the guy, I know more, and so on, and therefore I have the right, and tries to throw his weight around. But that's wrong. He has to be humble. He has to realize that he is running a risk, and he should be able to balance risk and reward on his own books without involving a social institution which was not designed for that purpose. Okay, how are we with time? Oh, okay. Now, as this story unfolds here, you will get your copy and you can read it. The speculation ended in fiasco. For some reason, the wheat price didn't rise, or didn't rise as much as they were hoping that it would. And therefore, as a result, there was a multitude of these Miller on Baker bills. And then they ended up with a surplus which nobody wanted, and they just had to feed it into the thing. But as a result, there were losses, and the losses were borne by public at large. Yes?
Could you explain why the spread got bigger? Because that was your red flag, and I think that's so important to understand.
That's a very good point, because it shows that nature has a built-in warning signal, right? So we agree that there were more bills, Miller on Baker bills, put into circulation by the conspirators than there was need for, because the extra inventory of wheat which was in storage was not moving. So by that amount there was an excess overflow of Miller on Baker bills. Now, when a market develops a surplus, then the price tends to fall, right? But here we are in the bill market situation where there are a lot of people who make it their business to check things out. And they realize that this is not a natural thing. It's not like there is more wheat which has to be sold, whatever price it may fetch. This is something which is not natural, which is artificial, which is manipulated. So they will stand back. Even though the price at which they could buy that bill is lower, they are not buying. They just stand aside. They don't understand, and they think this is wrong. You know, in other words, these bill traders in the bill market see that they are more of a certain type of bill. Then that's their reaction. They are not buying, even if the price is falling. You see? So withdrawing their offer to buy, the spread, there's still the same amount of bills which people want to sell, but the number of buyers is thinned out by that effect, which I'm explaining. And that is going to make the spread wider. I don't know if this is...
Okay, I understand the experts who maybe they balance the bread sales with the wheat. There's more wheat than bread going through the market somehow. So you say there's a balance or something. I guess that's what it is.
They are not aware that there is a conspiracy. They are not aware. All they see is what's going on in the bill market. And they just watch the volume of these bills to flow through the market and say, there's something fishy here. This is not, they have an extra ordinary sense of smell. This is not right. So they stand aside, waiting for clarification. And sooner or later it will come. So the speculation ended in a fiasco. As a result, that's important, the maturing bills, because at the same time, of course, these bills do mature. The wheat is sitting in the bin, not moving at all, and the bill matures. And it's supposed to be paid out of the gold coin of the consumer. But there's no consumer because nobody consumes the wheat as it is. And therefore, the only possibility is for the conspirators is to roll over their maturing bills. In other words,
money from their pocket.
In other words, when the bill matures, they draw a new bill, a fresh bill with a new maturity date, 91 days later, on the same wheat which is still in storage. Now that violates an absolute law of real bills that you never ever, under no circumstances, are supposed to roll over. That's an absolute, and although I didn't devote a separate chapter to this, but please make a note. This is an absolute no-no. There is no exception to it. You can argue with sickness in the family or meteors raining.
Widows and orphans.
Widows and orphans. There is no exception because that is an absolute violation. No exceptions, no excuses. You just have to pay. So that is where the thing can go wrong, and it does go wrong in many cases. And it has the consequences. And by the way, it's also inflation. This is how inflation starts, but let's not go into that. So, this was a very serious violation of the statutes of the bill market, because the limitation of 91 days on the maturity of bills is absolute. Under no circumstances must the bill on the same good be redrawn and put back into circulation. In the meantime, the bill market grew less accommodating. So while all this happened, the people became more suspicious and they didn't buy as easily. They checked things out more closely than they did before. So as the fraudulent Miller and Baker bills were, in addition to the regular ones supporting the supply of the consumer with bread, that is, on merchandise that did indeed move, the bid-ask spread appeared, as we have explained. When the discount house suspended trading in the Miller and Baker bills, conspirators were squeezed, financially squeezed, in order to extricate themselves from their situation. They threw their grain on the market. They were squeezed, they had to have ready cash. So what to do? Well, there is the grain, so let's sell it. But that grain was extra, which was not needed. If the real shortage would have developed, it would have been needed. But as the speculation failed, it wasn't needed, so the extra supply of grain on the grain market depressed the price of, say, wheat in this case, okay. This was a forced sale of an abnormal quantity of wheat, which temporarily depressed the price. The conspirators therefore wound up their ill-starred speculation with a huge loss. In the end, they defaulted on some of their bills at maturity. The bills were coming, they matured, and then they didn't have the funds to pay them because they couldn't sell the grain at the price they bought it, only at a much lower price. They had to absorb loss. Now, the consequences of a default on bills is far more serious than default on something else. And it's treated differently. And I remind you that even a loss of cargo on this ocean is no excuse for default, because the bill market insists on insurance documents being attached to the bill. So in case the cargo is lost at sea, the insurance company will pay the bill at maturity. So if a trader defaults on his bill obligation, which is different from defaulting on a mortgage, then the market takes it very, very seriously. There is a blacklist, and these defaulters will be blacklisted. And interestingly, even their sons or grandsons will not be able to go into business under the name of the defaulter, because they are still on the blacklist. They will not be trusted. It's not, I don't mean that they will not be able to make a living. I mean that they will not have access to that special privilege of using the bill market to finance circulating capital, because they are on the blacklist. So this is an historical fact, and I find it interesting that default on the real bill was considered so serious an offense that it took generations to live it down before somebody could use the same name. And that's why in this country, as well as in Europe it's even more so because there's greater history behind, some firms, family firms, which carry the family name in the firm's name, are so jealously guarding that the pristine clarity of that name. And there's also this accounting term, goodwill. Goodwill has cash value. Now this has to do with the name also. If you have a good name, it has cash value. When you want to retire, you can sell your business with the name, and that you'll be rewarded that way. But if the history is spotty and there were defaults here and there, then that goodwill could disappear. So that's just, again, another topic which I don't want to enter, but I want to emphasize that this is a very serious problem if somebody defaults. So merchants try not to default on their maturing bills ever, because the consequences are just too serious. If a merchant defaulted for reasons of personal financial tangles, then he could never again hope to discount a bill in his life, nor could his sons. The name was to remain on the blacklist for several generations. Being cut off from the bill market meant that the lifeline of the merchant was severed. Severed, because without that access to the bill market, to low discount rate and so on and so forth, he could finance his inventory at a very low rate, thanks to society backing up this operation. But he could be cut off. In case of default, he would be.
You'd have to make a living as an accountant.
Or a banker. The merchant found himself out of business. This was exactly the fate awaiting the miller and his accomplice, the baker. Now, I think I still haven't mentioned Acceptance House.
It's wonderful.
But it's a consequence of this. So rather than starting it now, I think we have the break.
That's your theme for 2:30.
The Acceptance House?
Yeah, well, that's the agenda.
All right.
I'm
looking
sorry.
for The revolt of quality. Is that what we're on? I'm looking at the agenda, Doctor.
The agenda has been upset by several factors.
Okay.
Marketplace.
And therefore,
Conditions.
Daryl came in yesterday, so
if
don't-
you
wait,
would
this is
like
not
to
on your plan.
update, that's what I'm planning. All
Okay.
right, let me tell you what I'm planning. So the Acceptance House will be part of the next period, and then I want to talk about borrowing short and lending long in general. So that will be at 2:30 in the afternoon. And 4:30 will be the unadulterated gold standard, which was originally scheduled for tomorrow. Now, the last meeting of this sequence of lectures is tomorrow, and I thought perhaps we keep it a little bit open in the sense that I will take up half of the time, and then we should have a discussion on the whole topic of real, and also on the topical nature of this. Why we are talking about this. This is old hat, goes back to Adam Smith, and so on and so forth. Our adversaries say that this has been refuted 100 times and so on. But we insist this is topical, this is something we have to talk about because of the crisis we are facing. So how this might just help solving the crisis. And that's tomorrow morning, okay? So please be prepared with your questions and comments tomorrow, because as I say, I want a cooperative effort to round it off. Okay, some topics were missed, but they were the ones which I thought were less important. And in any case, they are available in printed form, and we are working on it that distribute the photocopied today and tomorrow. Okay? Very good, thank you.
Thank you.